What a glorious thing to be, a healthy grown-up busy bee, whiling away the passing hours, pinching all the pollen from the cauliflowers. I'd like to be a busy bee, being just as busy as a bee can be, flying round the garden, the sweetest ever seen, taking back the honey to the...
So we're going to have a look at the banking section in Xero and the general navigation of it. In future videos, I will be showing you how to allocate and submit your reconciliations. But for this one, we're just going to look at the navigation and where to find things. So there's two ways you can actually get to your bank account. The first being quite simply from the dashboard. You can see here that you've got your two bank accounts. Now your layout of the dashboard might be slightly different. As I said in the previous video, you can actually edit the dashboard to choose what you can and can't see. Most clients have the bank accounts showing on the main screen as it gives them an indication of how much work they've got to do. So this client here has got 27 items to reconcile. The other place you can access the bank is through the Accounting tab in the top left-hand corner and then clicking on Bank Accounts. Now, again, like QuickBooks, there are two connections that you can have. The first being that it's a direct connection with Xero. So what we see here is we have a statement balance, and that is normally a sure sign that there's actually a bank account connected to Xero directly. So this is pulled in directly from the bank account that's been linked, and then you can see on the business savings account that we have no statement balance, and it's actually asking us to import the transactions, which tells me that there is no connection for that account. Ideally, you want to link all your bank accounts, makes your bookkeeping a lot easier, but I understand that there are a few accounts that still don't quite link with Xero, although they are getting better with the open banking that has been released over the last few days. So what we can do is we have two options. We can either click the title and that will take us to a list of all the transactions, which will show us reconciled and unreconciled, or we can click on the reconciled 27 items button and that will take us into the bookkeeping side of things. So I'm going to click on the title to start with, just to show you how that works. What this will do is it will take us to a long list of all of the transactions that have been recorded through the bank account. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a transaction from the bank pulled in that matches to it. So you can see here, for example, there's a payment to Xero, maybe their monthly subscription. You can see we've recorded a payment and we have also reconciled the payment against a bank transaction. However, you can see here that Gateway Motors, we've actually recorded a payment through the business bank account, but it hasn't been reconciled against an actual bank transaction yet. So we're not sure whether that definitely happens or not until that bank transaction pulls in. So that's the difference between the status of reconciled and unreconciled. And that's the main reason I come to the account transaction tab in Xero. The other tab that we will be working mainly off of when you're doing your banking and bookkeeping is the Reconcile tab. So if we go into that, this is effectively like the for review section of QuickBooks, if you're used to that. So what's happened is the bank's pulled in all of the transactions and it's trying to match against things in your bookkeeping system. So we can see here, for example, anything that's green, again, a bit like QuickBooks, it indicates that there's a match in the system somewhere. So, for example, this one has a payment for an invoice, and we have the payment of the invoice actually coming into the bank, so we can match the two together. You can also see further down that this box looks slightly different. There is a Discuss tab. This is where you can put notes if you're struggling to allocate a certain transaction or you need to go and ask for a bit more detail. You can actually write and save notes in here, which I find really useful in comparison to QuickBooks, where you can't do that at all. You kind of just have to make a mental note and go back to it at a later date. So that is a really useful feature in Xero. Just remember to press save, because I've done it many a times where I've written a note in and then forget to save it. So there is that as well. So there's a few things that we will cover in later videos when we talk about allocating bank transactions. But just so you know, this is kind of in the middle of the system effectively. So it's pulled in from the bank, but we haven't quite allocated it in the bookkeeping system yet. The other tab you've got here is cash coding. So what we can do is actually bulk change transactions into certain accounts, certain payees. Really, really handy if you're doing a year-end tidy in preparation for your accountant and things like that. The other tab we have is bank statements. So in here, if you've actually imported a bank statement rather than having a connection feed, you will find that all of the transactions are in here. And as you can see, some have been deleted, some have been reconciled, and some are unreconciled. But just make a mental note that anything that's unreconciled needs to be double checked, because that is affecting the balance, and you need to check that it's definitely happened in the bank, otherwise your balances might be slightly out. The idea is a bit like QuickBooks. You have a statement balance, which is the definite correct amount that's come through directly from the bank, and this balance in Xero needs to match that to be correct. That is part of the reconciliation. You also have in the banking section a manage account button. So again, it gives you access to the account transaction tab and the bank statements tab. You can also create in here manual spend, receive and transfer monies, but if your bank account is linked, you should have the transactions in that reconcile tab. So I wouldn't urge you to do that because it can throw out the balances with a bit of manual entry. You can also see here that you've got a bank rules, which is really, really handy. So again, a bit like QuickBooks, if you use a regular supplier, for example, for a direct debit, you can set up a bank rule for Xero to recognise that, for example, BP always goes to a fuel cost. So it really speeds up your bookkeeping, and would definitely urge people to use that as well. There are a few other elements of the banking section that I haven't quite covered. Xero is quite in depth with the layout of the bank. I find it a little bit more confusing than to get your head around than QuickBooks. But if you've got any questions, please leave a comment in the box below, and I'd be more than happy to explore that query with you. But that covers the general navigation of the bank, and in future videos, we'll have a look at allocating some transactions together. Thank you very much.
Oh, what a glorious thing to be a healthy grown-up, busy, busy bee.